And that is tonight's State of the Union address, coming as President Trump's approval rating has hit an all-time low among independents. He's sitting at just 26% support. CNN points out as the lowest it's been in either of Trump's terms. CNN notes his net approval among that group was minus 13 points at this time last year. Right now, he's at minus 47 points among independents. The president's net approval down 27 points ahead of the first State of the Union address of his second term. That's double digits behind former Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama during the same point of their second terms. That's his overall approval rating there. Let's bring into the conversation former U.S. Senator and MS Now political analyst Claire McCaskill and MS Now national affairs analyst John Heilemann. He's partner and chief political columnist at Puck. Good morning to you both. Claire, I'll start with you. You've been in the room for many of these State of the Union addresses. This comes as the president. We pointed to the independent numbers, but his overall approval rating in the low 40s, high 30s, depending on where you look, just suffered a blow in the Supreme Court on his tariffs. Some members of the Supreme Court, of course, will be sitting in the front row in the chamber tonight. What is the backdrop? What is the context in which President Trump makes that speech tonight?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of the Democrats don't want to sit and listen to him. So I think you'll have a significant number that won't show up. A few will go to alternate programming that's going to be going on tonight. But honestly, Willie, I don't think this speech is going to change much either way. What's really interesting to me about this polling is, yes, he's at a record low. But what's also happening is intensity. So what you have now is you have people who somewhat approved of him that are chased in to the somewhat disapproved. But more importantly, how many people are going to the we really don't like this guy? In polling, in politics, we call it barbells, where most of the people are either very much approve or very much disapprove. What's happened with Trump is his approval has stayed stagnant, those that are really enthusiastic about him, around 22, 25%, something like that. But everybody else on the spectrum is being pushed to, we really don't like this guy. And that's the passion that wins elections. And frankly, even if he stays on script tonight, I don't think there's much he can do tonight that's going to change that.
All right. So obviously, John Heilemann, I agree with Claire that this is a moment where there's a limit to how much one speech will matter, particularly in a day and age where attention spans are short, news cycles are fast. But there is a growing sense, the White House is preaching confidence. They're saying he's going to talk about the economy mostly. But there's a growing sense among Republicans that this is a moment tonight that it will matter at least for momentum, they feel like. This is a president who just suffered a major loss to the Supreme Court on Friday. We have seen he's way upside down on what's supposed to be his signature issue, immigration. Republicans can read polls. Right now, they're looking at, they think, a blue wave. The House, they feel like, could be gone. The Senate suddenly feels very much in play. What would you, if you were recommending advice to the president of the United States tonight, which, and look, let's be clear, he wouldn't take it.
I'll pass
but what would be, if you're trying to just even steady the nerves of other Republicans, where do you want to be?
Well, that's the easiest question in the world to answer. And I'll talk about it in 1 second, which is obviously talk about the economy, talk about affordability, and not call it a hoax, not go off on 47 tangents. Not do what he's done every time he's had an economic event, Jonathan. As you know, every time he goes somewhere to do an economic event, he ends up not focused on the economy. And when he does talk about the economy, he talks about it in ways that are not helpful to Republicans. That is what they all would wish for. And I think, if there was one thing secretly that they all would wish for, they would wish that he would stand up and say, I hear what the Supreme Court has said. And as much as I love tariffs, I am not going to continue, given the intransigence of the Supreme Court, I'm not going to continue to wage this jihad and not going to continue to inject all this uncertainty into the markets. I'm going to back off, which is not what he's going to say. He's going to talk about the ways in which we get around the Supreme Court and the ways he can continue to pursue the tariff agenda. But there's no one up there who wouldn't prefer if the Supreme Court was the last word on this and Donald Trump took the L and left the tariff thing alone. I'll just say one last thing about what Claire said a second ago. And I think it's important that the one speech won't change things is the flip side of Trump's dominance of the attention economy, for good and bad, right? If you're Joe Biden back when he gave his last State of the Union, you didn't see Joe Biden that much. He wasn't out on social media everywhere. He wasn't ubiquitous. So like the speech Is he going to be good in the State of the Union? What's his, what are his capacities? What are his faculties? Everybody looked at that, and it was a big moment for Joe Biden to come up. And if you will recall, he gave a very good State of the Union. It did not end up helping him in the long run, but in that moment, he could move the needle. Trump is everywhere all the time. And because he's everywhere all the time, an event like this feels more anachronistic than for any other president we've ever had, because Trump doesn't have a problem reaching people, again, for good and ill. For his supporters, they see him all day long on their social media feeds and they love him. For people who hate him, to Claire's point about the intensity that he drives, they see him all the time on their social media feed and they decide they'll do anything to stop him and vote against him. That, for him, these kinds of ceremonial speeches are less impactful than they are for any normal president because of the way he communicates 24/7 all the time.